and welcome everyone to the episode of Humans of Wharton, a podcast about Wharton graduates. Today, we're thrilled to have Sergii Sokolenko, Wharton MBA class 2005 with us. Hello and welcome, Sergei. Today, we're going to talk about Ukraine mostly. To get into the topic, Sergei, please tell us, what is your connection to Ukraine?
Sure, Yelena. I was born in Ukraine. I was born in the capital, Kiev. I actually spent the first 5 years in Kiev, and then my family moved to Austria, where I spent the next 5. Then I returned for 5 years, and I again went to Germany for the next 5 years. So my life is divided in these 5-year infamous Soviet-style 5-year periods. But, you know, when I was, I guess, 22, 23, I moved to Canada, and from there I stayed in the northern hemisphere of the American continent, sometime in Canada, and then moving to United States, where I lived for 17 years before actually moving back to Europe. I'm now in Berlin for the last year or so, working for a US company called Snowflake. Some of you might know.
How did you take the news of the Russian aggression in Ukraine?
Well, I think most Ukrainians were anticipating that something bad will happen, and we already we were in this constant state of anticipation. How will this actually get resolved? Will there be a war? Will Putin become reasonable and back off? Since probably December of 2021. So when the actual news came that the Putin army has began the invasion, it wasn't, for me, it was not a shock. I know that for some people it was a shock, but for me it was not really a shock. It was now there's a moment of certainty. Okay, the worst case happened. The invasion is happening. What do I do next? So that's how I took that news.
And what did you do next?
I did what I did 8 years ago, back in 2014, and as many other Ukrainians did. We began organizing informal logistics and supply and help routes to help Ukraine. For those of you who don't know, in 2014, Ukraine had a revolution where the government of President Yanukovych was dissolved, and Ukrainian nation has established a new government, a new parliament. Ukrainians call it we call it the Maidan Revolution. And during this time of Maidan, we ran supply lines. We basically bought medical supplies. We bought protective equipment for people on the main square, which were exposed to bullets and fire from the previous government. And so in 2022, again, we started organizing these informal supply lines, mostly through social media. We bought, I ended up getting connected to one of the startups I was mentoring, and they were asking me to purchase blood-stopping bandages, which is very important right now. Unfortunately, there aren't enough supplies of them. But as you can imagine, if there's a rocket attack on a building, or if there's a bomb on a building, many people will probably get broken limbs or get shot wounds, and they need these bandages to stop blood loss. So I ended up buying all the supplies I could get my hands on, found a supplier in Israel to negotiate directly. And through this example and many other examples, I ended up supplying the residents of Odessa, where I also have relatives. I have relatives in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and I have relatives in Odessa. So I ended up helping these folks buying blood-stopping sprays, buying trauma scissors, getting them wound dressing, things like this.
Yeah, excellent. You mentioned that you're driving a lot. So are you actually doing the shipping yourself?
Yes, I I sold my cars in the United States when I left the US. I was a happy European, carless, taking public transportation in Berlin, enjoying it. But because due to Mr. Putin, I now have to drive again. Fortunately, my driving skills still with me. Usually, in a trip, I do about 2,000 kilometers. For those of you who are on the American system, that's I don't know, 1,300 miles per trip. I leave on a Saturday. I come back on a Monday. For me, this is a weekend vacation. My wife kind of tells me, "You're only doing it because you like road trips," which in a sense is true. I do like road trips, but I only like road trips when they happen maybe once a month. And for the past 4 weekends, I've been doing these road trips. So I start with I start in Berlin, and I bring the supplies to the Polish-Ukraine border, where I deliver them interestingly, to the Ukrainian railway, volunteers who work with the Ukrainian railway. For those of you who are not initiated in the bureaucracy of the Ukrainian government institutions, the Ukrainian railway is probably the last organization you would go to if you wanted to organize anything quickly, at least in pre-war days. But amazingly, and this is actually true, has been true in 2014, is true today. I think during a time of upheaval and huge stress, Ukrainians do tend to break their old ways, and they organize very quickly, reorganize very quickly. So the Ukrainian railway and the customs office of Ukraine ended up saying, bring all the supplies you can get. We don't really care. Fill out this little form. There are volunteers at the railway station in Przemysl in Poland. Ukrainian volunteers, they help loading the stuff into the trains, and they go into the cities. We bring medical supplies. We bring these bandages. We bring this blood-stopping spray, trauma scissors, wound dressing, everything that people in Ukraine can use.
And you were able to get evidence of delivery.
Yeah. So it goes to, for example, in Odessa, I have my sister there, and she sends back me photos of when there's humanitarian aid that goes into a distribution center for medical supplies. She brings it to a hospital. I ended up creating a GoFundMe page just because it's the volumes that people need exceed my personal resources, but I always post my updates on that GoFundMe page.
Yeah, cool. What you touched upon, this decentralized nature of these supply chains and resistance overall, is fascinating.
It is. To be honest, I didn't expect us to last this long so far. Yeah, you would want to think that your countrymen and women are able to sustain an attack, but we are talking about the second largest army in the world, right? And that invaded Ukraine, probably 10 times as powerful as the Ukrainian army, perhaps more. 10 times is the difference in GDP. I think the yearly spend of Russian army was $60 billion per year before the war, and Ukrainians were spending like maybe 5 or 6 billion per year on the army. So we are talking about 10x difference, and obviously they have cruise missiles, they have the fancy flying equipment, which Ukrainians don't have. And that's why you see so many civilian losses, because the cities are being bombed by cruise missiles, long-range rockets, and unfortunately, we can't do anything against them.
What do you think? What's your outlook on the military side of it, if you have an opinion?
I'm a civilian. I have. I can only tell you what my brain comes up with after reading some secondary and tertiary sources. The Ukrainians are fighting really hard, and thanks to the amazing work by the U.S. government and European partners, they do have like local range weapons to destroy tanks, to destroy helicopters. Unfortunately, we don't have anything to go against the more sophisticated planes and the cruise missiles that Putin has. But you've seen pictures of columns of tanks being destroyed. One of the interesting conclusions from this war is that the Putin army is actually not as strong as they claim. And if a small nation like Ukraine, small, not geographically, it's a large territory, but there are only 40 million Ukrainians, so it's a 4x difference to Russia. So if Ukrainians could hold the positions with relatively small territorial loss at the moment against this 10 times larger army, supposedly unbeatable, then with more supplies, with more help from Western governments, they can be beaten back. There's probably going to be, I don't want to speculate if there will be territorial losses, yes or no. At some point, we'll have to negotiate a settlement. But I do think Ukraine will remain an independent country. And ultimately, there's a timeline to Mr. Putin. He is 68 years of age, and so in about 10 years, he's going to be an old person. And nothing against old people, but he's going to be an old person in a vulnerable situation where there will be lots of folks vying for his position. So in a decade from now, it's going to be a completely different story in Europe.
Все буде Україна.
Слава Україні.
Героям слава. Sergei, what about the spirit of freedom and spirit of resistance that you have encountered?
And I think this is the true spirit of Ukraine. We don't like really powerful authoritarian governments. To our own detriment, we will fight against these governments, even if the government is kind of benevolent and could be a good thing for the nation, as, for example, Putin was in the early 2020s, early 21st century. I guess he was a better choice than Yeltsin, the almost always drunk Yeltsin. But he became an authoritarian, and in Ukraine, he would have not survived this long. He would have been deposed as we deposed Mr. Yanukovych.
Yeah. By the way, let me ask you this question. You've lived in and out of Ukraine, and majority of your life you spent outside of Ukraine.
Yeah. What
place in your identity Ukraine has had and has now?
As many Evertonians, I'm a person with many homes, so many places where I feel home, which I like to visit. Ukraine is a place where that is a home to me, and I care deeply about it because it had a really tough history for the past, I would say, 30 years. So in a sense, it's there are bullies that are trying to beat up this emerging democracy, and naturally, I mean, many people would go and sympathize with the folks who get bullied, and so I'm sympathizing with Ukraine, not only because I was born there, but also because there's a big bully that is trying to impose their will. So that's how I think about it.
So you root for the underdog.
I root for the underdog. I hope David will beat Goliath, and I'm rooting for the underdog.
Do you feel Ukrainian, or how Ukrainian do you feel?
So I'll share a secret with you. I'm actually slightly more Russian than I'm Ukrainian because my mom is from Moscow, and okay, so maybe I'm 50-50. But my mom is from Moscow. She lived in Kiev for the last 40 years. She's as anti-Putin as you can get. Her own family is now being bombarded by the folks who sit in Kremlin, and my wife is also Russian. How Ukrainian I am? I'm Ukrainian by choice, obviously by some birth coincidences, but also by choice. I choose to be Ukrainian because this is a nation that is trying to be something good, that is trying to survive and bloom. It's not a nation that is trying to impose its will on someone else. They're just trying to be a good European citizen. So that's how Ukrainian I am.
Cool. You've been, before the war, you've been very active in the Ukrainian startup scene.
That's correct, yeah.
What do you see is happening to it now? And what's how to help it survive right now?
There was an initial shock. I run a small publishing operation where we publish news about Ukrainian startups, investors in startups, and Ukrainian IT ecosystem. It's called U-Cluster. Most of our contacts, most of the startups we interviewed in the past, in the first week or two of the war, they were obviously in shock. They were trying to flee. They were trying to either join the army, the territorial defense forces, or they were trying to move their children to a safe place. So it looked like the entire ecosystem just stopped. But things are getting back to, I wouldn't say normal, but it's getting back to a state where we need to carry on. We cannot just simply be sad. We got in touch with all the startups we talked to in the last 3 months, and we already heard back from a dozen of them. They have plans to continue operating, and they would like to give us updates on their plans. So our own publishing operation for the startup news is carrying on, and we'll be publishing news about Ukrainian startups shortly.
Great. And by the way, how's your family? How's your mom? How's your sister? Where are they now? What's happening with your family now? Your mom was in Kiev and your sister was in Odessa when the war started. Where are they now?
Yeah. So I was able to evacuate my mom. She's now with me in Berlin. And one of my sisters is in Odessa. My other sister is in Kiev. They're still there. They chose not to go. And my brother is also in Kiev with my nephew. On the other hand, we were lucky to get our niece and grandniece out. So right now we doubled our the population of the place we are staying at. In Berlin, we have six people now. So in a sense, we were lucky.
I hope they stay safe. Before we conclude, I wanted to thank our Wharton community. They've come through with enormous support, donations, and sharing their voices to stand with Ukraine. What has been your experience with the Wharton community, and what do you have a message for them?
I do. It will be a quick one, but I would like to express my deep thanks to all my classmates, all my cohort mates. I ran a small fundraiser in my list of Facebook friends, and everyone was very generous with their donations. Everyone was very supportive with messages. So I would like to say thanks to all of you for supporting Ukraine and Ukrainians and your classmate in this very difficult time. And my hope is, I know that many of you are successful and you have influence and levers of influence and power. I'm hoping you can use your good position in various companies, organizations, VC funds, or PE funds on supporting Ukraine in the future, investing in Ukrainian companies. After this war ends, there will be a need for reconstruction. I'm actually, I've been doing angel investments for a while in Ukrainian startups. This war led me to make a decision to actually join a fund as a venture partner, focusing just on Ukraine. So I'm hoping that many of you could consider becoming limited partners, could consider making decisions on sourcing your goods and buying from Ukrainian suppliers, just so that the economy recovers and Ukrainians can build a self-sustained and successful economy.
Thank you. That's a great message. Sergei, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Yelena, for inviting.
And thanks everybody for watching. Stay tuned for more episodes of Humans of Wharton.